Many of our meetings tonight, we're always discussing the struggle here at home, talking about low-wage workers, people's assemblies, and also what is really key to the struggle here at home: racism, national oppression, how the ruling class uses every effort to head off and buy off any form of direct people's democracy of any kind. And I'm very glad also that Larry connected this to the struggle, the electoral victory in Newark just this week of Ras Baraka. Now, in talking about the struggle abroad, and in so many ways you'll see where I'm going with this because they do so much link up. But I want to start on just a couple organizational points so that everyone has this planted really in our minds. There's a very important demonstration scheduled for Monday, Memorial Day, May 26th, at Times Square. And we really do want to urge everyone here to both take some flyers, spread this social media. It's slogans of no to fascism in the Ukraine, no war with Russia, and also bringing in stop NATO expansion, and bringing in Syria, Venezuela, the expanding U.S. war drive. We held a very successful teach-in at Riverside Church this past Saturday on these topics, where a whole number of voices from throughout the movement here participated. So anyway, that is Monday of Memorial Day, about 10 days away, and it's a question for us and a challenge. Can we alert the movement of the danger at this time? And I want to say this is a real uphill battle. It's a big danger, but this is one struggle where the ruling class is so united that it has created a kind of a passivity among even anti-war elements that you would expect to be responding. Also, I think everyone has, this is a very interesting development, a flyer on your seat. This is a teach-in that's going to be held tomorrow by a FIST member at NYU, who organized this as both a street meeting and a teach-in in Washington Square Park from 11 to 1 o'clock tomorrow. So it's really co-sponsored by FIST and the International Action Center. And tomorrow is a day when there are 5, maybe 6 things going on. So everyone here is being pulled several different ways. So don't want to pull anyone away from what you may already be signed up for. But if you're available, this teach-in street meeting organized by Ramiro, as I say, an NYU student and FIST activist, please do try to be there. Some of the speakers at the teach-in from Saturday will also be there, Bayon with some of their youth activists, and we'll take a bullhorn and some signs and see how it goes. Also, we're going to be having a meeting here on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday at 7 o'clock, to build for the Memorial Day demonstration. So if you're able to come for that or invite others to it, we very much want to make that sort of open to the political movement, to many allies and supporters. All of this is part of, there's a national call by United National Anti-War Coalition, but quite a number of groups within the political movement have signed on to it in support. We'll have to see how much they're really doing, but to hold anti-war actions around the country. And so far, I think there's actions in about 28 cities, and that's a big accomplishment. Large and small teach-ins, political resolutions, demonstrations, very important Central Labor Council resolution in the Bay Area that Dave Welsh helped to get just 2 days ago. It's a time when overwhelmingly, in every poll, the Wall Street Journal did a poll where it said 5 to 1, 80% of the population against any kind of conflict that involves Russia or the Ukraine, sort of stunning figures. Other polls gave it 2-1 and 3-1, but this is a time when overwhelmingly the population is against a war, and yet, as I say, there is this passivity in the movement. We got to struggle against, consciously struggle against it, and try to rally forces as best we can. Now, that being said, let me just raise a very interesting point about Vice President Biden. You know, he's been extremely active and especially threatening on the Ukraine, traveling to the Ukraine, rushing back and forth. He cut short his trip to Latin America just after the fascist coup to rush back to Washington to welcome Yatsenyuk, who was the appointed head of the illegal junta. And he had meetings with these ultra-right fascists. Now, it's a basic of Marxism, and everyone here, I think, gets this, that the ruling class is driven by their economic interests, what they seek to gain. That's what drives them to support fascists, to use their state apparatus to send hundreds of FBI and CIA agents and thousands of contractors. But imperialist politicians also cash in on a personal level. It's never called corruption. So, just yesterday, it was announced, wait, before I get to that, I think everyone here knows that Vice President Cheney under Bush became a billionaire, right, over his interest in Halliburton. This is something the Democratic Party politicians were always talking about. But it seems that Vice President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, it's an interesting name, is the director of Ukraine's largest gas producer. He has been since January, but it was kept secret. It was kept secret. He was named a director and a consultant, secret director. He's a consultant on transparency. You can't make these things up. I mean, it's too incredible, right? At any rate, he is the director of transparency for, I kid you not, for Burisma Holdings, who happens to have the largest number of gas permits in the Donetsk region, East Ukraine. So, now, we're not conspiracy theorists. We're not saying it's one person. It's as a class. There are big interests in the Ukraine. But we also do know that the politicians individually cash in on it, whether it is Cheney or Biden. Now, this caused a big stir in Europe. There were all kinds of articles where it said it raised eyebrows. Vice President Biden has especially been active in calling for sanctions. But let me say that Hunter Biden, because he's so concerned about hunger, is actually the chair of the World Food Program, which deals with the UN World Food Program and ending world hunger, right? I kid you not. This is really, it's important for us to see the sheer hypocrisy, how many layers thick it is with these corrupt politicians, and what a hold, what a stranglehold they have on politics here in the U.S. and on the media. So, and they use the state for their own personal gain, but for the interests of their entire class. Now, the state apparatus, it's not neutral. They use the funds that we pay as taxes like it's an open checkbook. Here's $5 billion, as Assistant Secretary of State Nuland said, $5 billion to aid the, quote, democracy movement in the Ukraine. Remember that, as they were paying off all the fascists? And then another $10 billion to stabilize the situation, another $17 billion to guarantee the loans, and so on and so forth. All while they're cutting, in the very same week, money from food stamps right here. They sent in, and this was announced in the German press, hundreds of FBI and CIA agents into the Ukraine, and 400 Blackwater. Blackwater has been renamed. It was Greystone for a hot time, a short week there. But now you would think they were educational, that you'd think they were teachers. they're called academy contractors. Sounds very nice, doesn't it? These are death squads. These are hired guns, but they're now called academy. They're mercenaries, absolutely mercenaries. So it means financing, it means social media, it means money for the gear, that means the social media, it means weapons, it means training, it means mercenaries. Now, I want to talk about the exciting developments this week, and again, it really takes looking at it through Marxist glasses. There was a tremendous, very important popular referendum called in East Ukraine, and 6 million, this is a big part, I mean, this isn't, on a square block, 6 million people in this region took part, overwhelming, and this is true in all the media, they're talking about 85 and 89% so on participation. You see the pictures, not in the U.S. media, but in all different kinds of world media and on Facebook, of thousands and thousands of people standing in line to cast their vote in what's called the People's Republic of Donetsk and the People's Republic of Lugansk. Now, there were statements this week from an openly Marxist organization, Borotba, that I want to quote from. They put out a statement called Socialist Chance for Southeast Ukraine. And they quote the people's mayor of Slavyansk. This is very interesting, where he said the entire industry of this city will be nationalized. And went on to explain that the industries could not be left in the hands of unscrupulous businesses because they are the ones who are paying the neo-Nazi gangs. And how these oligarchs are the beneficiaries of the Euromaidan coup. They have their own private armies. And they particularly name a very important, the richest oligarch, whose name is Akhmetov, that he has funded the fascists, and but they say at the same time, he's funded the moderate current of the anti-Maidan movement. And he is the main funder for both political parties in the Ukraine. Now, this is something we know from corporate power here, that they will fund both the Republican and the Democratic Party. So it shouldn't, and at the same time, even parts of the social movement here. And this is true for Rockefeller and Soros and a lot right here. So it's not surprising that an oligarch like Akhmetov would be doing that in the Ukraine. They describe another billionaire, Kolomoyska, I hope I'm pronouncing these names correctly, who was providing a $10,000 headhunting fee for the kidnapping and killing of leading activists. So there are two approaches of these oligarchs. But Borotba's statement, this socialist grouping, was that the logic of the struggle to survive will push the masses in an anti-capitalist direction. That even if that's not their intention, this is what will happen because what they're up against. That the struggle, also they say another very important thing, and it shows they have an international view, that the struggle has moved not only southeast Ukraine, but the entire post-Soviet space to the left. That's very interesting. And they quote, and it's worth quoting here, in describing the unevenness of this development, they quote Lenin from a talk that Lenin gave in 1916. And I was thinking of it again, actually, when Larry was talking about the struggle here and in Jackson. But at any rate, Lenin said, "To imagine that social revolution is conceivable without revolts by small nations in the colonies and in East Europe, without revolutionary outbursts by sections of the petty bourgeoisie with all its prejudices, without a movement of the politically non-conscious proletariat and semi-proletariat masses, is to really repudiate social revolution. It's not just one army lines up in one place and says we're for socialism and another somewhere else says we're for imperialism. That's not social revolution. Whoever expects pure social revolution will never live to see it. It's a revolution without understanding what revolution is. And then he goes on to describe the Russian Revolution of, this is Lenin writing, the Russian Revolution of 1905, which was a bourgeois democratic revolution, and a series of clashes and battles of all the discontented classes and groups. And populations participated. And that many of the masses had the crudest prejudices and only vague ideas. All the sort of sundry oppressed groupings within Russia at that time came to play a role. And that mass struggle is impossible. As a matter of fact, no revolution is possible without this unevenness in development. These huge, both uprisings, spurts forward, very mixed. And it's how you chart your way through it. So anyway, I could go read more of that, but it's very interesting. It shows really how they're looking at the struggle and seeking how to find a way. Now, Fred Goldstein in Workers' World this week, I just want to touch on, in closing, points that he made, and really to say that all around the world, we're getting more commentary on the articles on the Ukraine than I think we've ever gotten. I mean, literally, and people connecting to us now on Facebook who hadn't, on Twitter, even from other political groupings and tendencies, because of our analysis and also because of what we're doing. But Fred raised it, the most important part of the struggle from the ruling class point of view is how to disarm the resistance in East Ukraine. And they're seeking to do it politically. The agreement at Geneva calling on and threatening Russia to demand that the masses in East Ukraine disarm. They're doing it with false promises. Well, Yatsenyuk actually went to East Ukraine and said, yes, you can have autonomy, just disarm, then autonomy. Doesn't work that way. And now militarily and through terror. So it's different tactics. That Putin's role has been ambivalent, contradictory, ambiguous, based on really what he represents also within Russia, who's caught between trying to avert an escalation, a showdown with the US and the EU, and the radicalization that's happening of the masses. The real problem, though, is that Ukraine it's all leading to a struggle with imperialism, no matter how they try to forestall this. And that's what we have to keep in mind. There's the struggle of the U.S. against Russia. They want to recolonize it all, and now the gloves are off. If they can't do it in Ukraine, they're already talking about what moves they're going to make in Georgia in the coming month. I mean, really, in the next coming days. And against Ukrainian masses who are seeking to get out from underfoot of this fascist junta. On the other, the Ukrainian resistance, they need the support of Russia, they need the military, they need political support, they need backup, but they don't want to be under the thumb of Russia. So it's a revolutionary movement seeking allies, but in a contradictory situation. Now, all of this, I don't know if everyone, did anyone here see the coverage in the New York Times today about in Mariupol, where the Times is just over the top in their coverage about how steel workers had gone into the biggest steel plant and pushed out the resistors. Now, even the Times and the Washington Post says that the person who organized this is Akhmetov. Now, thinking back on this statement I just read where the socialist Borotba were talking about, he is the richest oligarch with a private army. The Washington Post was a little bit more muted. As I say, the New York Times was over the top about this workers' movement that's been born that is like clearing the resistors out of factories and fighting for workers' rights. You know, it's a private army of this oligarch. And as Washington Post says, this is Ukraine's top tycoon who owns both political parties, and he's the richest man. And So we'll see where it goes. We'll see where it goes. But we shouldn't take the New York Times word for what's a workers' movement. And we must not allow Wall Street, the White House, Congress to continue a build-up for war unchallenged. So we hope to see everyone here in the streets Monday, Memorial Day, at Times Square at 1 o'clock and beforehand. And everyone who can join the FIST youth tomorrow at Washington Square Park, knowing that there are many other commitments, or next Tuesday for a building meeting here. But let's really figure out how not to allow the White House and Wall Street and Congress to continue the build-up for war unchallenged. Regardless of our size, we're going to challenge it every step. Thank you. These events happening tomorrow, now someone sitting here might say, well, why can't you just figure out one activity or what you're doing? But it's such a good example of the living struggle which everyone here is participating in one way or another, and in one kind of struggle or another. So it may be youth who are fighting for Black history in the schools, and it may be students who are organizing a teach-in, and it may be veterans in the community naming a block. Now, there's one thing, actually, that, as it turned out, lucky for us, doesn't conflict, and that is that there's a meeting at Teamsters Local 808 at 3 p.m. tomorrow, which brings together many of these struggles, from the People's Power Assembly, from Million Worker March, from May 1st Worker and Immigrant Rights Coalition, and everyone should really try to be at that meeting, because we have to march in many different struggles, and then we also have to figure out how to bring it together. And that's a challenge. It is a challenge, because we can be pulled apart by the struggle, or we can help pull the struggle together. And you got to always be thinking both. Now, where was the quote from on Lenin, I was asked. Such an interesting piece. It was called Discussion on Self-Determination Summed Up. And this is really Lenin's greatest contribution. It's on explaining self-determination, a revolutionary way forward. So it's very interesting that this group in the Ukraine chose that to quote from, because it shows what they're reading and paying attention to. And if you're going to talk about Ukraine, you got to talk about self-determination, nationalities, and oppression, and revolution. I wanted to add to what John Catt was saying about where workers, another example of where workers are pulled in a reactionary direction. A reactionary direction. I don't think there's any country in the world that has more experience with white workers who act against their own class interests time and time again by siding with racism. And this has been true in big strikes and small strikes and community control of schools and neighborhoods and questions of the police and the prisons. And it's why we have to be more experienced than any people in the world in defending self-determination, and also always confronting the racism of white workers here, because it's financed, it is financed from the big corporate bosses. Now, there are other times in history. We could also talk about the Gdansk shipyard workers in Poland that actually acted against their own class interests in pulling down. They lined up with Solidarity. We could talk about the Kosovo miners in Kosovo, the Albanian miners who lined up with the IMF and U.S. There are lots of examples, but the worst examples are right here. And so standing up to racism right here is really, really important. Last point, because I was asked about this quote on fascism. These are from these socialists in the Ukraine, because they also said it's important to name where fascism comes from. And they quoted Georgy Dimitrov, who was a famous communist anti-fascist fighter of the 1930s. Said, fascism is the open terrorist dictatorship of the most reactionary, chauvinist, imperialist elements of finance capital. It's not a superclass power. It's not the power of the petty bourgeoisie. It's not the lumpen proletariat. Fascism is a power of financial capital. It's an organization of terrorist reprisals against the working class and the revolutionary section of the peasantry and intelligentsia. Fascism is in foreign policy is chauvinism in its crudest form. It cultivates xenophobic hatred against other nations. So it's important. We want to both identify, and it's important that they are identifying what is fascism, where does it come from, and what is the way forward. So they put out this statement. Goodness, they're quoting Lenin on self-determination. They're naming their own oligarchs. This is a very exciting development, if you're following developments at all in the Ukraine, that it is, while it's workers actually seizing buildings and industries and calling for their nationalization and voting and setting up people's assemblies on a really mass scale. But they're politically quite sophisticated, and they're taking historic lessons, and it shows that they also study while acting.